Welcome home, brave heroes. I'm Ash. This is HeroQuest. And today it's time for another episode of BWODECAST. This seems to be a very consistently Monday show. This particular episode will be good to listen to while you are commuting to or from work, perhaps painting some miniatures, perhaps sorting through some Magic the Gathering card decks, perhaps doing that stuff while commuting to or from work. Be safe out there, whatever you're doing. And let me know what other activities you enjoy while listening to podcasts of this type. I would be interested to know. I'm always interested to know how people use the content that I make. This time we don't have a guest, but we are instead interacting with the community as I address the answers given in the BWODECAST Q&A section of my Discord. You are always free to join my Discord, the Amalgam Archive, and interact with the BWODECAST topic of the week, more or less. And the question that I asked basically is, where does Avalon Hill go with HeroQuest after the current known expansions are done and released? The current known expansions being the ones that were leaked on that Reddit post, and those that were confirmed or teased by Avalon Hill around that time or since then. And that includes the Path of the Wandering Monk, the Prophecy of Talor, Against the Ogre Horde, and the Spirit Queen's Torment. Well, it's not the Spirit Queen's Torment, it's just Spirit Queen's Torment. I wanted to talk about things that they could do and content that they could add without delving right back into the extremely obvious long list of classic X-backs and woulda, coulda, shoulda beens. I'll go through that list for posterity, but I won't linger. I just wanted to see kind of what haven't we come up with yet? What haven't we anticipated yet? What could they do with HeroQuest? And this is going to delve a bit into more original content, I would think. But the answers given were kind of consistent. There were a couple of new things and some things that I'd kind of considered before and that people have asked kind of frequently, but not really as predictable, I would say. And that'll make sense in a moment. So before we get into that, the things that I would count as like the fairly obvious things, the next low-hanging fruit, that would be, of course, the other EU exclusive expansion, Wizards of Morcar. There have been people asking for the scenario, The Dark Company, which was a 13-part scenario, not a 4-board scenario. You could play it on 4 boards if you never anticipated picking up any of the furniture or anything, as the actual quest text describes doing, but 13-section quest that was included exclusively with the European HeroQuest Advanced Quest. And when I say that, I don't mean Advanced HeroQuest. That is a completely different product. And the Wizard and Dwarf quest packs. I have seen lots of discourse over whether those could even happen. And the answers that we seem to have been given, the statements that would allude to the answer for these topics is, yes, they can be done. They absolutely can be done. We had a few, I would say, misconceptions across the various HeroQuest communities that they couldn't be because they weren't going to do any more character expansions. That, I don't know where that perception comes from, but it's inaccurate. It's not true. The character expansions I would consider to be the ones that are part of the Hero Collection. So the Commander of the Guardian Knights, the Rogue Heir of Elithorn, and the upcoming Path of the Wandering Monk. But I think they were obviously referring to the Barbarian Quest Pack, the Elf Quest Pack, and that comes from a statement made by Chris Nato in the Avalon Hill Discord that they don't use that terminology when referring to expansions. Nothing is called the Barbarian Quest Pack. Instead, it's called the Frozen Horror, which is the proper name for that expansion. And the Elf Quest Pack is not used. Instead, it is Mage of the Mirror, which is the proper name for that campaign. So when we talk about the Dwarf Quest Pack, we are really talking about the Hammer of Hadraka And when we are talking about the Wizard Quest pack, we are talking about Sinister Sorcerers. Now, obviously, those names are subject to change. Those were very prototypical names. Who knows what kind of revisions they would have went through, or if they would have been accepted as is when they were beginning to get created back in the 90s. These two campaigns didn't see the retail light of day, but they had significant work done on them in the background before HeroQuest was altogether abandoned as a product. And there have been a few statements on how nostalgic it would be, and I agree with those. I've seen contention towards that viewpoint, which is kind of bizarre, because there's some folks that believe you can't have nostalgia for something that doesn't exist, but that's kind of missing the entire point of what nostalgia is and what it means. It's more of a feeling, and seeing a quest pack that is based on what would have been released in the classic era would absolutely conjure up feelings of nostalgia, regardless of whether that was retail released or not. Anything that would have been back then, the previous HeroQuest, the ones that we've all played and fell in love with, we would be nostalgic for that feeling. And that, of course, is what people are referring to when they say that either of those packs would be nostalgic. That's just my 2 cents there, a viewpoint that I stand firmly on. I've heard a lot of stuff to the contrary, but I'm not moved yet. I don't think I'm going to be. I think I'll be comfortably stubborn with that. We'll move right on into the answers given to this question. Again, where does Avalon Hill go with HeroQuest after the current known expansions are done and released? Who has played Advanced HeroQuest? What did you like or not like about it? I have complained, not on the channel. I don't have any Advanced HeroQuest content on my channel, either channel. But I would say the bar of entry is a little high if you're just wanting to get right into it. There's a lot of text, there's a lot of rules to get into and learn about the game, because it's going to throw a lot at you right in the beginning. But other than that, I really like Always Bored, Never Boring's take on the game. It's a roughly, I'm paraphrasing here, basically, but it's a dingy, dirty experience. It leaves you feeling like this is the grim reality. If dungeon crawls were real, you're just killing rat men trying to scrape enough coin together for your next meal. That is the feeling that it gives. I don't know if that was the intention. Advanced HeroQuest, I can't imagine anybody living in a reality where they don't know what that is. But it actually was released the same year as HeroQuest, just a little bit later. And it was from Games Workshop alone. They didn't have Milton Bradley's participation, and they really had a ton of reference to Warhammer properties. We have a take from Philip A. Murphy back in January of 1990. His impression was that this was exactly the same game as the original HeroQuest. But I do love here this quote. However, Murphy did not like, and I quote, the constant references by word and image to Warhammer this, Warhammer that, Citadel miniatures, Citadel paints, future supplements, and White Dwarf magazine. I absolutely get that. Yeah, I really think that is a great take, a very valid take. This same person says he felt the original game by Milton Bradley had been rushed out of production and could have been much better with more playtesting, but he felt that Advanced HeroQuest had the opposite problem, calling it overproduced and a tad too complex. And he also said it should be magnificent, and indeed at times it is, but just as often it's a great disappointment. I think those are fair takes. I don't like the viewpoint that HeroQuest is rushed. I can understand it, but I don't like it. I like that there's vagueness to the rules. I think that's contributed a ton to its success. But the first answer that I got to this question, after all these segues, I'm so sorry, was from Leorlek, who said, I'd like to see them release some more original or new quest packs to expand on the world and setting. I'd really love it if they would introduce Morcar as a new and different antagonist for the heroes to face as well. Harmonious evil is boring. Give us some stories where the heroes and the kingdom are besieged from multiple sides by different enemies who are also fighting one another. Let the heroes play part in maneuvering the forces of Zargon and Morcar against one another to give the kingdoms a respite. That is a pretty cool idea. there could definitely be factions that aren't really a part of the evil side. I actually think we're going to see that once Against the Ogre Horde has its resurgence, because the ogres in HeroQuest lore are not part of any specific factions. They are their own thing, and they'll really work for whoever the highest bidder is. And when I say highest bidder, I mean the person who can throw more meat in front of them. They're not there to make money. They're not there for fame or glory or fortune. They have one very simple goal, and that is to eat. And if that means eating people, so be it. But the person who can feed the ogres has the ogres' shaky, uncertain alliance, at least for a time. That is the impression that I have of the classic ogres for HeroQuest, not Warhammer. I'm not delving into the Warhammer ogre lore because I'm ignorant of it and it's irrelevant. The ogres in the contemporary version, we don't have a lot of background on them. So it's very possible that the reinterpretation of them could mean that they are aligned with Zargon as opposed to just being there and being convinced to help him out or whatever. They could actually be commanded by Zargon. I think I would be disappointed, so I can definitely agree with this harmonious evil being bad take. So the next response I'm going to read out kind of dictates the direction that the rest of this episode is going to go. And this is from Sid Tandy, who said, I really like this topic. And speaking of Advanced HeroQuest, within the community, I often hear the argument against homebrewed stuff. And why don't you play D&D or an RPG instead? And I always keep thinking, what exactly are the steps from HeroQuest to a full tabletop RPG, really? And is Advanced HeroQuest one of them, or one of many? I did have a response to that, and I'd like to read that verbatim here. I said that there's a spectrum of perspectives. Nobody is really invalid, but nobody can really encroach on somebody else's perspective either. If we delineate the game, HeroQuest, until we arrive at a point where it's no longer HeroQuest, then you and I may very well arrive at different points. So delineation in this case is like, what if we take this and we talk about the elements of it in the broadest sense? So what are the elements that make up HeroQuest, basically? How many of those elements can we include on a blank canvas until it becomes HeroQuest? How many elements can we take away until it's no longer HeroQuest? Having said that, I think any system at all can have a board game version or multiple board game versions and a tabletop or multiple tabletop versions. So a board game can definitely have crafting, combat, gathering, quests, trades, skill paths, levels, any other elements that you can think of. But each one may be firmly locked along a linear and easy to define gameplay loop. So at the far end of the spectrum, we have the completely freeform tabletop RPG with differences between those RPGs in terms of complexity and freedom. And the further you go into the incorporation of variables and scaling, the farther to that end you go in that spectrum. Dungeons and Dragons is in that area. You can do whatever you want, although the outcome of whether it works and what happens when it works is still dependent on a DM and a die roll, which is weighed against a stat that your character has. So if you go beyond that, we start getting into territory like the game that Calvin and Hobbes played. And for anybody not familiar with Calvin and Hobbes was a daily American comic strip. You'd often find it in newspapers. It was created by Bill Watterson, and it ran for years. I think it started back in the mid-'80s, and it ran until the mid-'90s. But the characters, Calvin and Hobbes, is a boy and his plush tiger, which was alive in the comic strip. Calvin and Hobbes would often play a game together. And in this game, there seemed to be absolutely no rules, no structure, no box in which to put everything. It was just, so we're walking together, and the sky is blue, therefore I earn 10 points. And the other character would say, well, I'm going to walk backwards, and as long as I can hum Yankee Doodle Dandy, I'm going to get a blue marker. And there was never any context expressed as to what any of this stuff meant. It was never like re-referenced. You always had, well, I win because I'm doing this, and then I'm I'm really just like building an imaginary today. I'm not quoting anything word for word on how the game was played, but that is very much like how the game was played. And so that's what happens when you extend yourself past that spectrum of rules and limitations. You have freedom, but then the freedom begins to become out of control. In order to have controlled freedom, you need some rules. And then, what those rules are, that's subjective. And we're sounding really oddly political. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just talking about games here, guys. So we're going to pull it back. We're going to come to the middle of the spectrum and a little bit to the other side of the spectrum. HeroQuest is not on the opposite side completely, but it is kind of nestled somewhere in that side. The players have choices. The players have freedom to a degree, but their actions are defined and they are within closed loops with only a few outcomes. This is the simple board game structure, and that's the main difference mechanically. A player that is using the vanilla game system cannot speak to the monsters. Zargon cannot make relevant what any particular monster is doing other than existing, moving, attacking, or casting a spell. A player cannot lie, intimidate, persuade, or attempt to beguile or charm an enemy, nor can they stealthily slip by after monsters have been placed on the board. Although, if you use the game system rules as they are, Zargon could actually play the monsters as if you did sneak past them. He could just move them about with a bit of roleplay while still completely playing by the rules. But I think the steps in between are basically trying to answer the question, what more can I allow the participants of the game to do? So Advanced HeroQuest is not, to me, a step between HeroQuest and role-playing. It is a little bit removed from HeroQuest. I disagree with Murray's take on it being exactly the same game, just produced by a different company. That's very silly. And I don't have that person's standing or influence or responsibilities or whatever he did back then. I don't think that you need to have that stuff to be able to have a valid opinion. But I can't see them being the same game at all. I just play them both, and I don't think you'll disagree whatsoever. I do think that there are ways you can role-playify HeroQuest in order to get it closer to that tabletop RPG, and I do think that you can carry it to the extreme and make it a full-on tabletop RPG. You just have to break through the restraints that are there. Don't make them more complex, I would say. Just break through them and introduce more freedom, more facilitation of stuff. As long as you're keeping to the die rolls with the existing elements, as long as everything is still contained within the game system that is included when you have the product, you can get there. And you can get there in many different ways. You can use many roads to tabletop RPG HeroQuest. Can they role-playify it? Yes. Now, can they make Advanced HeroQuest as it was? No, because that was just Games Workshop. That was a rule set that was far removed from HeroQuest. I think that, though, based on the fact that rules and game systems as they are cannot be copyrighted, it is actually entirely possible for Avalon Hill to make a game that is almost identical to Advanced HeroQuest. And they could do so using their own sculpts, their own artwork, their own references. They don't have to reference Citadel or Games Workshop or Warhammer. They don't have to have Skaven. They can definitely have Ratmen. We're getting a League of Dungeoneers expansion with the second printing Kickstarter that I just found out about. And it's going to have Ratmen. I cannot wait. I cannot wait for that. Give me all the rats. The idea that they can't touch Advanced HeroQuest as we know it is unrelated to the fact that they can make a system that is nearly identical to it. They just have to write an interpretation of the rules that would be different authorship. It would just have to be different wording, basically. And then everything else about it would be theirs. It would be theirs for the taking. I don't think that they would do that, though, because Avalon Hill is very focused on fun and their interpretation of what fun is. So I believe if they were going to do that they would take a hard look at all of the feedback that has been given by players of Advanced HeroQuest throughout the decades, I believe that they would take their own ideas of what would need to be fixed, so to speak, about the game. And I think that they would definitely look at homebrew that people have made for Advanced HeroQuest and home rules. And they would apply those to an idea of a modern day Advanced HeroQuest. I think that they could absolutely do it, though. They could absolutely make HeroQuest, give it a different name other than Advanced HeroQuest, just so that there's no issues with confusion. That could be a point of contention legally, but it would not be difficult to do that. You could just call it HeroQuest Advanced Quest, just like the old game. Maybe you could even include the 13-part scenario, The Dark Company. But you can go ahead and give it the role-play feel. You can go ahead and apply it in an advanced sort of rule set that incorporates everything that we know about Advanced HeroQuest, just without the messiness. And there's also prime opportunity to make use of the same products, of which there now is so much more than there was back when HeroQuest was being published in different territories. If you stuck to just the US contents, we have so much more now in terms of content than we did just in the US. And if you look at the UK stuff, we have so much more now than if you were only able to access the UK or EU editions of HeroQuest. So they can actually now call back to all of that stuff. Actually, Advanced HeroQuest, having come out in the same year as HeroQuest, it only had HeroQuest to reference. It didn't have the US exclusive or the EU exclusive expansions to reference. It didn't have access to that content yet, because those came years later. But I don't think it would have anyway. I think it would have just continued to reference Games Workshop and Citadel products. So it's kind of a moot point there. But an Avalon Hill, quote-unquote Advanced HeroQuest, could absolutely reference all of the material that is available right now and up to the point where they release it. If they did such a thing, they could give you additional rules for cold biome dungeons, for the frozen horror, for ice gremlins. They could even make up cold biome versions of the enemies that exist. So you could have cold goblins, you could have frozen orcs. I know that sounds delicious, like something you'd slap into the microwave for 3 minutes, but I'm talking about blue-skinned orcs that are immune to any sort of ice spell, who can slip and slide and skate across the board and bite you. And if you are bitten by an ice orc, then you'll slowly freeze yourself. You need a potion to cure that ailment. I'm just pulling stuff out at random. But guys, I think that that's absolutely doable, and it sounds like a lot of fun. And it's something that I don't think that we would get a lot of heads up from Avalon Hill about until they were ready to basically reveal or tease a product that they had already pretty much made up their minds about how they were going to deploy. So that kind of seems to be the way things are right now. So anyway, that's my take. That's where I think Avalon Hill could go. As far as roleplay systems, I don't think they have a lot of roleplay systems under their belt as far as the company is concerned in their history. It's a lot of simple board game mechanics and a few that are semi-complex. But if we do get some kind of roleplay version of HeroQuest, whether it's a tabletop role-playing game or it's something more in line with Advanced HeroQuest, which is not a role-playing game, but still a dungeon crawler, just with more complexities and more elements added, I would still very much support that. I'd be very, very excited to hear about that. And I would love to help play test and get that going. So anyways, thank you very much to all the folks who join the Discord and take part in the discussion. And if you would like to discuss the next BWODECAST topic, which I don't have at the ready just yet, please feel free to join the Discord, which is always linked in the description below. As always, comment anything you like down below. I'd love to hear you weigh in on this discussion, because it's not necessarily over, just the video. And I will see you in the next one. Until then, onward, brave heroes.